This is a very long form video of my style of Chaozhou inspired Gongfu setup, which contains components and individual techniques that I think are usually not emphasized in the Western facing Gongfu world, but I think is really fun to try out. And obviously this isn't even authentic. I'm just completely just copying stuff that I see certain like Chaozhou potters and teapot hunters and stuff that I like, stuff that they do, I'm just kind of copying their techniques, so whatevs. Today I'm trying out a 2025 Snooze Fest Shung. Really big shout out to New Tea Fan. He sent me a whole bunch of samples. He's like a big sampler. He's just right off the bat sampling a bunch of teas. I haven't done that very much myself, but this is really great. I'm finally doing it and appreciate his kind of help on that. This kind of goes to show how little, what do you call it, tasting ability I have compared to others. So I purposely put smaller fragments in here. I know some people are very careful and they try to balance out ratios of small fragments and large fragments, etc. I'm actually not that careful for that kind of thing. And I've also noticed quite a few people, kind of domestic Chinese, Chaozhou type, Chaozhen type people, purposely, right before they drink their tea, they will crunch up the leaves to smaller fragments. So I guess you're changing the ratio of small fragments and large fragments right before you drink it. I kind of understand why. I think a lot of times people see that, and kind of us Western facing, Western Gongfu people, we see that and we think, oh, it's probably bad because they're small fragments. And small fragments are always bad, right? Just like how tea bags are bad compared to larger fragments. But I don't think that's always the case. I think over time we start to learn that maybe certain flavors come out at certain times, and breaking them, of course, allows certain flavors to come out quicker. And I think it actually does give it a bit of a rounded flavor. But again, you'll probably notice that I don't have really the terminology for flavors, etc. down very well. And so a lot of that's kind of more or less personal preference. I think I'm going to add a little bit more here. This unfortunately means that this might be enough for just one session with this pot. And the rest here I'll probably use with a much smaller pot that I have that is relatively incredibly small. Sweet, I've already done a little bit of warming for this pot. You'll notice how instead of just dumping these cups, I'm pouring it on the pot. And then of course, once poured on the pot, this will go into the tea boat. So this process, I think sometimes people call it a thermal chain, or at least it's the, I don't know what you call the translation that I see a lot. But the idea is that once I put something hot into a vessel, I can pretty much always put it somewhere else to heat another vessel or another component in the process. I've also heard the comment before, I don't want my pot to be sitting in a bunch of tepid water. That's why I don't use tea boats and I only use dry setups, kind of like this where it drains. Again, completely understandable comment, as long as that person doesn't do this process of constantly dumping the tea boat out, or the tea boat that actually fills and bathes the pot. Sweet. So now I'm going to fill the pot. You'll notice here that I'm actually going to let the pot overflow slightly. And there's going to be a bunch of little bubbles here, kind of like a scum layer, and I'm going to purposely scrape it off as I put the lid on. Didn't do it the way I wanted to, but you'll notice it overflowed. This is actually one small step in the process of filtering in order to overcome the need or necessity for having, careful, like small grain filters, sieves, that kind of a thing. Kind of spent a lot of time talking here rather than pouring out my wash steep. This is like a relatively new and recent shung. So I'm going to taste the wash steep. This is definitely the downside to recording the video, because it can't be fully present. I guess it's kind of the downside to recording anything, is that you have to have an audience. You can't be fully present, and it kind of sucks. You'll notice here that I'm pouring on the pot. Again, a thermal chain. This is hot, so I want to keep the pot hot. I'm going to put the hot onto there. It's obviously very green because it's very recent. Tastes rather vegetal. It actually reminds me of my mom's kind of hometown Ureshino in Japan, in the Saga Prefecture, where they produce quite a bit of green tea. I was pretty much raised on only green tea, so I only knew one kind of tea. And I also had a certain pretension, and maybe even a slight racist tilt, where I did not trust anything Chinese, and that was pretty horrible, I think. It obviously didn't lead me to learning anything about tea, and it also made me think that Chinese people were dirty and gross, which is insane. Kind of like the craziest thought in the world, but I'm glad I don't think that kind of way anymore. I don't think people in Ureshino are that way, though. I think that was just me picking up on weird little parts of society that I guess every kind of group of human beings is going to have. So once again, I'm going to heat the cups a little bit. I'm just going to pour a little bit in here at first. I'm obviously talking, so I'm kind of losing concentration, which sucks. Notice I'm doing this thing where I put the pot lid on halfway and I'm pouring water on it. That way I'm heating the pot lid and the pot too. It's overflowing, so little tiny fragments are kind of overflowing. This doesn't matter very much because this is not a very tightly packed juan or tool. Usually gin, tool are pretty tightly packed. They have a whole bunch of tiny little fragments. Doesn't really matter in this case, but you'll notice sometimes I use this method where index finger is on top. This actually is not my favorite method because I can't do this without burning my finger usually because I can't reach the top very well. There are obviously ways to overcome that by turning the angle of the hand, etc. I do prefer, of course, thumb on top in this position that looks almost like, I don't know, kind of weird look. There we go. What I don't like about this loofah is you can tell it's kind of thick. Usually I will trim these loofahs down. I'll cut them. So usually in a normal session I would just be able to completely stare at the leaf the whole time and feel the aromatic rise, so the aroma's rising upward. But this is like a video, so it sucks. I can't like completely focus on that stuff. But it's whatever. I mean, in reality, sometimes you'll be like pouring tea for other people, so you're focusing on the conversation and you're not like focusing on the tea or whatever. And I think that's totally okay too. It'd be kind of crazy if like one was allowed and one wasn't allowed. I think like a lot of people like Gongfu because it's not really strict and weird like that. Whereas in like Sado and like certain like matcha, people are like really weirdly strict, which is kind of, I guess, the problem of any kind of very well-developed lineage is people really want to like hang on to it, and they're like, oh, you got to do it this certain way. It's the only correct or right way. So this is of course slightly cooled. This is, I don't know, this is just something I pick up just from basically just scouring the web of Chinese domestic discussion on Chaozhou type stuff and just watching people. It sucks because I'm not even talking to people, but this is just me just watching and observing and trying to like copy what they do. So it's probably something's probably weird. But my theory is that when this pot is filled with hot water, and boiling hot water, and I pour it out immediately, that immediate like cup, before it cools and has time to stay at a lower temp, it tastes different than what's going on here. Like here it is kind of cooled down. It's been sitting like this for a little bit. and the flavor changes like very slightly. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it makes it bad. Is this bad because it's been sitting here for a little bit longer? No, it's like totally okay. There's nothing wrong with it. But I do like to be able to taste the flavor, but right out the pot immediately. So what's nice about these tiny cups. They're so small. This is actually kind of big to me. This is like it's almost like a little over 35 mils. But it's so small that I can actually put it to my face and just take really small sips that I'm dispersing out into like all of the tissues of my mouth really quickly, which allows me to not burn my mouth because I'm like shooting it all over the place. And that's what allows me to drink right out of it, basically. So I get that flavor, and then as I'm drinking another cup here, I can get the flavor of it sitting for a little bit. So it's been sitting for a little bit, it's been kind of cooling a little bit. In a sense, it's almost like this is brewing. I think chemically this is probably changing as it's maybe like releasing volatiles, etc. There's just kind of a slight difference here. And again, I don't have the skills to be able to change this into verbally, you know, what am I experiencing here, change it verbally into something else. Imagine someone who has an actual tea degree or something can like explain what's going on, or they know like, oh, these polyphenols or something are changing, etc. I don't. I'm kind of just experientially doing this and just kind of noticed that I liked whatever that was being done. So again, I don't have to do this. Maybe I'll do it this time this way. You'll notice that this is a linear column that's flat and doesn't change. I find that people talk about this and I watch people do it, and it looks aesthetically pleasing, but I think it also makes sense because then you're getting a direct hit on the entirety of the shoulder of the pot. So the shoulder, you're not like splashing it on certain regions. That's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with splashing it on certain regions. But I think if your point is to try to get as much heat as possible throughout evenly, it's probably what you're going for. I think I'll do this method. You'll notice that here, my index finger and middle finger are doing the majority of the carrying work. And then I switch here to what looks kind of like a Vishnu mudra. In this position, these two fingers are pushing down and out. These two fingers are pushing against each other too. So it creates a we call it a very tight grip. I usually try to dry my hands off too. The nice thing about clay is that when your hands are relatively dry, clay also dries quicker than most kind of glass, whatever you call glazed finishes. This becomes incredibly tight and strong because I'm pushing out in this direction, kind of pushing against each other. It makes it very tight and strong, and you can really shake out the last little drops of tea. And when you really shake out the drops of tea, you can tell that those are not brewing inside of the vessel. I'm going to set this down, or actually before this, I'm going to dump out the water because this is kind of cooled to some degree. And also, I don't know if I really want to keep it that hot, the heat of that, as it's just sitting here. I'm gonna lift it off a little bit because I want a little bit of steam to come out, but not too much. If I do this, all the steam's gonna come out. For different teas, I wanna maintain a different kind of heat or temperature inside of the pot. I might call it like a microclimate inside of the pot. So it kind of depends. Like certain teas, I kind of feel like maybe I just wanna be able to like smell it coming off the top or something, so I'll leave the lid off completely. Kind of depends. I think for like shungs, especially young shungs, for whatever reason, I do this. I don't know. So I've been talking for a little bit. This probably is going to taste the same as when it just first came out, but I'm getting a lot more of like the bitter astringency that I like in a shung. This is like steep 3 or whatever. I'm still tasting essentially what I tasted at the beginning, but I like this one better. This would probably be the steep that I'm less likely to just keep throwing out. This must be about 80 mils. Since I'm filling it full of leaf, and as you can see, the leaf is really saturated with water, so it's sponged up. It really doesn't produce any more than, what is this? It's probably about 90, this is 90, 35. So it's 70. So it's about 70 mils, I think, of tea that's being produced out of each steep. Steep 3, so what is it, 70 times 3, which is kind of more or less, a little less than that, which I've actually drunk. And if you see that, there's a little bit left where there's fragments. This is one of the many steps in the many multi-step process that allows this Chaozhou setup to not have Gongfu and not have a filter. There's no filter involved here at all, and I haven't drunk any particles yet. Totally, this is easy peasy to not drink particles for this kind of leaf. But for any kind of like zhen or like, what do you call it, tool, where you have really small particles, like this one, Shaoguang Libing Fengxun tool, you're probably going to have such small particles that it's going to be all over the place, and it just becomes kind of annoying to drink. In a sense, that makes sense. Alright, I guess this ramble is done for now. I left for a few minutes, but what I was talking about is how this has a lot of very small particles, and still yet, doing this process, I can filter out pretty much all the particles over time using maybe about 5 or 6 different steps that I could always explain later, how once you continuously have overlapping steps that get rid of particles like that, there's really a need for using Gongfu with the fairness pitcher, the fair pitcher with the filter on it, or even having any precise filtration. You'll notice that this actually is a simple 6-hole, and it's not even a protruded 6-hole filter. It's just flat on the body. In a sense, a lot of people consider this as a very low quality filter hole. Like, this is a bad filter hole. But all my pots have different filter holes, and I don't really care at all anymore. Like, I used to care about that kind of stuff. But I think over time, as long as you have enough of these techniques that kind of overlap on each other to stop from drinking the little bits, the very tiny fragments, then you're typically okay, and you don't really have to think about it or even care about filtration ever. Regardless, I still have one of these filters. It's pretty much just from just friends over when I have guests. Because guests, I think they look at this process and they kind of wonder if there's going to be little bits or fragments. And I think they also sometimes kind of assume you just have to drink the little bits on the bottom of the cup and not throw it out. Because it's just not part of what their usual rigmarole. It's not what people usually do in most society. Once again, I'm going to do kind of like a very flat linear column. I see some people doing this, like they fill from here in order to not mess up the chadang, whatever that is, the tea gall, which is like the very careful setup of the tea inside the pot in order to put larger leaf to nestle around smaller leaf fragments. And honestly, I don't really do that all that much. I oftentimes just kind of shake the pot to try to get the small fragments down into it, to shake it. It's not good enough to me, I think, as long as the pour into the pot, for the most part, is pretty stable. But I'm guessing at a certain point I probably will change this and develop this over time differently. This obviously is not like I'm not like, I haven't arrived. Like, this isn't like the way I'm going to do this stuff forever. And I don't even do this for a lot of teas. These are all just individual components that I've just stacked on each other, or just learned or picked up from different places, and I just apply them whenever I want. And sometimes I just don't apply any of them. I'm just like essentially just drinking tea out of a tea bag, or just drinking your Japanese, tinta instead of like a normal style kyusu. There you go. I can tell now this has done a little less floating. What's really nice about these loofahs, the reason why people use them, they quietly use loofahs. Use like a lot of people, like Chaozhou people don't ever use those bamboo rattan things because they don't float. Like, these don't float. I like it. These don't float, which is really nice when you have to pour this thing out. So you're trying to pour this out, and you see how it's not floating. I think it's called capillary adhesion, like the technical term for why this sticks and adheres. But that's the idea, is that these loofahs are amazing because they're so damn flat. Because you want to make it really flat so that way this thing gets submerged with hot water. They're incredibly cheap. I actually just buy the individual loofahs. It's like a big old loofah and just cut it. And like I put it in here like that. And usually, I gotta thin them out too. Like this one's been used quite a bit, but it's pretty thin. If it's not thin, and the edges especially aren't thinned out, it doesn't do that capillary adhesion thing. I obviously don't use it on the tin T-boat. This material is tin. Very few people have tin T-boats. Tin huchang, or whatever they call it, huchang. Chacheng. Chapan. This is incredibly tall, you'll see. See how much is in there? It's about 500 mils already. So this holds almost 1,000 mils, almost 1 liter. And for these types of like pretty Chaozhou specific setups, usually they fill up like pretty much toward the end. So by the time you're on like steep 8 or 9 or something, this thing's pretty damn full. But it's really nice because this is all just one, oh my god, this is all just one thing. There isn't like an extra, jianshui, wastewater container. I don't need that in this setup. And since this thing isn't very flat, it's like relatively easy to pick up and carry. If you have a really flat, big ass like tray or whatever, it's really hard to carry. I had to pick it up, move it, and it's gonna start like wavering left and right. And when I try to dump it, it's like annoying. So you'll see that a little bit's left. It's kind of where some particles are. And I obviously want to pour it on the pot for that pot raising, where over time the pot will just develop the patina that you're kind of looking for. I kind of think the patina has its own like flavor. When some of these pots really build up, because I do this every single time, so I always dump a little bit that's left on the pot. Essentially, this is the tea pet, right? Like in the tea pet dumping process, I think it might come from this, or it may have, this kind of in a sense replaces the tea pet. I don't personally like the tea pet because it takes away from my ability to, my focus on dumping onto the pot, or the pot shoulders. In this case, I'm not pouring into the pot or trying to pour into the pot. I guess who cares if we get like a drop or something in there. There we go. You'll also notice that this is pretty much out of water. But that doesn't matter, it's not that big of a deal because I have another pot in another room where I just keep near boiling but not boiling water, and it heats that part of the house. I think I'm just going to leave this in here for a little longer. This is slightly ladder steep, and a little more heat is okay. I'm going to go refill this pot. So if you made it this far into the video, you'll probably notice that there are obviously functional reasons for all the shit. Like, it's obviously not done just for out of complete and utter pretension, I think. And when I'm alone and I'm not like recording, or if I don't have guests or something, like if my mom doesn't come over and drink like 1,000 little cups of tea with me, then there's kind of, just me like sitting here just looking and constantly doing this heat chain thing and just like looking and smelling. That's kind of all there is. For whatever reason, in the Western facing Gongfu world, there's usually like a book, and there's like someone like the tea here in a book. And I don't know, maybe like kind of in like Anxi and like Fujian, like whatever, like different regions, like that might be a little bit more of what the tea setup is, or like what it's for. But for me personally, I'm like a very easily distracted person. And so like just having other things like distracts me. And I just end up like doing like one steep at a time, like leaving, going somewhere else and coming back. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's a great thing. And I get to just do a little steep like every once in a while, and there's nothing wrong with that setup. But I also think it kind of detracts from like the focus on the tea. And I'm that kind of a person where the majority of my life is spent in what you call like the mind gate. So everything is like in my head, just thinking about shit, just like spinning it around in my head. And that's what causes problems for me, like I get really anxious, etc. So if I'm doing something like this, where everything is sensory, everything is eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body, and not mind, the sixth component, it's all just sensory stuff the entirety of the time, it kind of helps me get out of bad loops. And it helps me like reset by just having the right conditions, which is just the focus on this stuff. Feels good, feels natural, and this stuff just gets developed over time. I didn't land on this in one day. This is just me picking up little stuff, a little bit at a time. I used to have the bamboo tea tray thing like everybody else. I had gongdabe, I had filters, I had like bigger cups. I pretty much always had like a 100, even 200 ml cup the entire time. This is just kind of a new thing essentially for me, a relatively new thing. Of course, you'll probably notice this entirety of the session, I never had to like hit an electric kettle to turn it on, and never had to do any of that because this kettle stays boiling the entirety of the time. Probably can't see, but this is actually a literal boil. Of course, in the Chaozhou and Chaoshan regions, there's like different names for the boiling. I think in pretty much probably in all like Chinese tea traditions, they have different names for boiling levels because they didn't have like actual measurement tools back then. It was just you look at it and there's like crab eyes. I forget what the middle term was, and there's boiling, like roaring boil. It's kind of 3 general boiling points. Pretty much always I'm doing a roaring boil. I try to get to a roaring boil for this kind of like a young sheng, especially an older sheng. Maybe for certain young shengs I'll do like less than boiling, and I find that is okay. You'll notice I'm letting this cool. Usually if I'm doing the setup alone, not take the video, I wouldn't let this cool like that. I would just immediately pick it up, put it to my face, and just have it at my face a lot. Blowing air on it to very quickly change the temperature. One good thing about small cups is you can very quickly manipulate the temperature really fast. So it kind of makes it a little bit more kind of technical, scientific. I can immediately change the temp because there's very little heat mass. When I pour water into here and I have water inside the pot, there's a much larger heat mass. Since the pot has only so much water, 90 mils, when I pour water on the outside, it makes the entire heat mass like what, like 130, 150 mils of heat mass. But I still have a very concentrated tea inside of it. It's very concentrated, it's very flash steeped, so it's a very short steep time. So I'm basically drinking how much by now? So this is like 70 times like 5 or 6 steeps. And when you go to like 10 steeps, 12 steeps like you're usually doing, even if I am dumping quite a bit of this water or this tea out, 60 mils times 10, 600 mils. I'm drinking 600 milliliters of tea doing this little process. So this isn't like just playtime with like little toys. You're drinking tea. It just takes a long time because every single time you're drinking it, you're immediately tasting and smelling it like immediately after it comes out of this hole, basically. And you're smelling the change and tasting the change of the tea as it cools, which obviously is different. It's not the same. It's not going to taste the same now as it's been sitting here for a long time as it tasted coming right out of this thing. So, obviously this stuff is not necessary. I'm not going to tell anybody to do it, but I also see that there's very little, like I can find very little Western facing people explaining any of the shit, like at all. Like nobody explains it, nobody knows what it is. And yet you try to like post it on like Reddit or something and people are like, what the hell is this? I've never seen anybody do anything like this in my life. Of course, I should probably post, like, I don't know, the different people I follow. But I just find, like, I just go to Instagram, basically, and kind of follow, like, I don't know, kind of, like, different potters. Usually, like, Chaozhou potters, and then kind of look at the people who follow the potters, and you can start to find, like, people who, like, deal in antiques. People who are, like, teapot hunters and stuff. And they'll sometimes post, like, videos of them making tea and stuff. And you can see all of these techniques. But other than that, I definitely use a ton of AI. Like I just ask ChatGPT to basically scour Chinese, domestic Chinese sites that explain this kind of stuff and find, like which pages are they on, what kind of terms are they using, translate it into English, make it understandable. This cup rolling process is obviously not necessary, but yeah, it obviously does heat the whole cup. And yes, it is like scientifically to some degree provable that the volatiles inside of the tea will condense on the cup. And also the temperature will change. Immediately right as it's poured out of here, this is gonna taste differently than and probably smell differently than if this has been sitting here for like 20 seconds or more. Also notice that, I don't think I did this in this session, but a lot of these guys, like especially for the very first steep, like anything, like maybe they have like a dead song or something, they put a dead song inside of there, they do the first wash steep, the very first steep, they pour a little bit of it out, like a very tiny amount of it out first, and then they pour into here. So it's like, why are they doing that? Like, why would somebody go to the extent of doing that? And these setups aren't like extravagant. Like, it's usually like some dude just on a table, and he just has this set up. You have the T-boat here with like a really big catch tray. You have like a plate here, pretty much always, or maybe it's another like catch tray type drainage thing. They're always pouring that out. Like, why they be pouring that out? You wonder. And so, of course, I asked ChatGPT, hey, like, scour Chinese sites, domestic sites. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Western-facing Gongfu stuff, but scour those sites and try to figure out, like, why do they do that? And, you know, you're pouring out, first off, it's kind of water usually, but also it usually contains, like, little floaters. It's like little floaty fragments. It's partly why you let the water overflow when you fill it. You scrape off that scum stuff and the bubbles, because it has little fragments and particles that you don't really want. Probably also like certain flavors, like flavors from the roasting process and stuff that are like trapped there. So I guess this will go on a little bit longer for me, but I don't know, if you made it this far in the video, consider yourself like an owner of like Reddit gold bars. You get a lot of internet points, and you get to be like a performative, you know, high-minded bastard like me. See ya.